Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 8th, 2023. Time for another show, except this time I feel like a brisket somehow. It's very smoky. Probably a little worse than yesterday in our area. Still visible smoke just sort of floating around here at ground level. Today there's a smell, although it's not as bad, the smell, as I thought it was going to be. I was thinking about this. I was lucky yesterday there was no smell that went along with it, and of course you must have seen by now pictures or video of the orange haze that engulfed New York City. We don't have that going on here, at least not that I can tell, but there's definitely a haze. It's a gray haze, a good smoke-colored haze, not a dust storm on Mars color haze. But yeah, and I also had heard that the smell was kind of acrid and unpleasant, which is kind of what you would expect. But this has more of a campfire smell going on. Not a great campfire smell, but the difference, of course, I think, being that generally speaking, at a campfire, you're burning, relatively clean. I mean, it's okay. For environmentally speaking, it's very dirty, but otherwise relatively clean fire, some firewood that you gathered up or maybe even brought with you. Nothing weird or unusual in the fire. Of course, in a forest fire, everything in the forest burns, so who knows what the hell's in that smoke. I mean, smoke isn't good for you anyway, but in addition to being burning wood and leaves, there's burning whatever the hell's out there, burning animal poop, burning animal carcasses, abandoned cars and their tires and batteries, for all I know, toxic waste that may have been dumped in the woods by unscrupulous disposal agencies / the mob / people who just didn't want to deal. I don't know. Anyway, it's unhealthy smoke, and we have it pretty bad in the area. I think someone was circulating a website online via Mastodon that I saw this morning that had sort of a put in your zip code and it'll tell you how bad it is, and we're among the worst, and it's almost in that sort of maximum space there, and we might have to go out and build one of these air purifier fan boxes that I had working for a while during COVID when there weren't enough air purifiers around. So maybe that'll be the activity of the day, or maybe we'll stay inside. It's very bad outside. At any rate, lots of other news happening. It's very bad for the former guy, which is fine by me. It's also very bad, I think, well, I don't know. Some people say it would be very good for Pat Robertson, who is now dead. Normally, that's the sort of thing that you say, well, that's too bad about that. But of course, Pat Robertson believed he was on his way to heaven, so I guess everything's great. And if he's not, well, then, I don't know, eternal justice is being served, or nothing's happening, and atheists are right, and he's spent his life in vain. All right, well, not in vain. No one ever lives or dies in vain. That's a bit too much. But at any rate, but if it happened to Donald Trump, I would say that wasn't in vain, but that would be okay with me too. But Donald Trump, in the meantime, faces more, temporal justice here on Earth as prosecutors are closing in. The big story that broke yesterday afternoon was, I got a copy of it from my brother Mark via The Independent. I don't know why the UK was beating us on this news, but everybody else was making sure, I guess, taking their time, making sure everything was correct, and it is. What can I tell you? I mean, Donald Trump is guilty of espionage. That's the long and short of it. I think we kind of knew that. Well, for a long time, we kind of knew that. And I think we pretty much definitely knew that if the reports were correct, when reports reached us that he was caught on tape confessing to his espionage. I mean, we went over it the other day when the story broke that there was tape of him speaking in Bedminster, which ends another angle to the story, about having these secret documents and that they weren't declassified, even under his weird and idiosyncratic version of the very strange law that we say gives presidents the right to instantly declassify anything they want. He was sitting there admitting that he had forgotten, neglected, decided not to declassify this document, but that he still had it in his possession. And, well, that's it. Open and shut Espionage Act case. And so I guess we kind of have to, well, we wait and see. They're not going to drag him away in irons, although, you're free to do that if you decide you want to go that path. But that's where we are. Former presidents guilty of espionage. Whoops. Oh, well, didn't mean for that to happen. Greg Dworkin is here to talk about it. And maybe the smoke. I don't know. How are conditions in Connecticut today, Greg?
Pretty smoky. I mean, my son sent me some pictures from New York City, and it looked basically like an orange sky.
Yeah.
My other son lives on the West Coast in San Francisco and has to go through this all the time. And yeah, people do wear masks out there. And it's sort of weird to watch online the maskless people, the ones who think COVID is a hoax, get all upset if you wear a mask because there's particulate matter going down your throat and it's like smoking a pack of cigarettes. And so they just smoke cigarettes. 9 packs of cigarettes and inhale some toxic fumes just to show that they're manly.
Yeah, well, people love to do that. I was out yesterday just making a couple of errands and, well, I had the mask handy, so why not, right? And there were definitely some people
especially
out
if it's
there
an N95, because those things come in really handy.
Yeah, and I mean, you stocked up on them at one point, most of us, and maybe you still have some around. I still do, and so they were, and I still wear them going into stores occasionally, if not always. But yesterday it came in handy. The annoying part was now it's a habit that when I come out of the stores, I take the mask off. So now I got to put it on when I leave the store. It's smoky out there.
That it is.
All right.
So I'm going to send you a funny picture that you'll be able to see, but of course nobody we're talking to online can see. But I'll describe it.
I'll tell you what it is. Oh my God.
Well, I haven't sent it to you yet.
Oh,
but
you caught me on that one. Did a Lauren Boebert there?
Yeah.
It was a
as
protest
you were running
laugh.
up the steps to look at the picture.
Okay.
There's a new video game out, Diablo 4, which was just released a couple of days ago.
Do I know?
And
this?
they had a big billboard sign for it in New York,
look at that.
which was advertising it. Diablo 4, Welcome to Hell, New York, June 6, 2023. And in this picture is the actual untouched New York skyline with orange sky because of all of the smoke, sort of at sunset.
All right.
And the Blizzard people who were responsible for the Diablo 4 game tweeted this picture and said, we just want to be on the record as saying, we didn't do this. This isn't us. We don't like fires. We're against fires. We're on the record for that. We just want you to know. So it was a twofer for them, a little advertising and a little amusement.
Yeah. It's quite a picture. You all can't see it, but if hell were orange,
baseball games were
that's
canceled.
what you would look at.
Flights were grounded at the airports because you can't see. Here in Connecticut, not quite that bad. Usually the air's a little better than New York anyway. But New York yesterday was worse than New Delhi or Beijing, which are the two standards of oh my gosh, the air is terrible. Here in Connecticut, it was definitely hazy. It looked like a cloudy day that was about to rain with just sort of an orangish haze in the sky. But when you took a deep breath, it smelled like you were standing next to a campfire. You could smell the burning stuff, which is just really weird. And we got a few more days of this before it breaks up.
Yeah, I guess so. The wind pattern is a little weird, and I guess that's what's, one, bringing the smoke down, but also keeping it here. It also made...
but it's going down as far as Virginia, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's yesterday was hazy, but I didn't really smell anything. And today is hazy, but it definitely smells like campfire. Not awful.
That's what we smelled yesterday. It wasn't all the time. It wasn't every day. It only started for us yesterday. So you're getting today what we got yesterday.
Okay. Plus whatever else you put in here.
But
Thanks a lot.
That's what they're talking about when they go out and say that.
Yeah.
And my West Coast son says, well, yeah, it happens in New York and all of a sudden it's news. We've been putting up with this for years now.
Well, stop lighting the West Coast on fire then.
Yeah, exactly right. Anyway, so there's that. And, of course, Pat Robertson dying. So, there's news on that front and what's going on with Ukraine, which may or may not be the beginning of the offensive. So, and CNN, where Chris Licht is fired.
Yes. Yeah, and we got word of it just after you left. I'm sure you would have liked to have had some time on the air to discuss that, if only to say,
we have time
that's
today,
good.
but there's nothing to discuss other than the fact that I just hope your listeners have been properly set up for it, because we did spend some time on it.
Yes, I think we all, well, now we got the big profile, and we did get a lot of time on it, I think.
And it was right after the Atlantic magazine story, so that had a lot to do with his firing.
I think so.
Congratulations, Tim Alberta. He's
nice job.
putting another notch on his belt.
Mm-hmm. Alberta, Canada, not on fire currently, but was last week.
Yeah. So I want to get back to something which I tend to obsess about, and everybody laughs at me, but it turns out there's reason.
Uh-huh.
And that is the non-functionality of the House under Republicans.
Okay, that is funny.
You may recall this story. Once upon a time, Kevin McCarthy wanted to run for Speaker.
Yes.
He didn't have enough votes. So in order to get votes, he had to promise everybody everything. And what he promised to the ultra-radicals, and not conservatives,
too hard,
is that you get to help run the place. And they thought to themselves, actually, what we're going to ask for, especially on like the fifth iteration of him not having enough votes, is we're going to ask to run the place.
Yeah.
And McCarthy said, yeah, sure, fine. What do you want? They said, we want to be on the Rules Committee, and, we want to have a lot of say over legislation. And McCarthy said, fine, just vote for me. So they voted for him, and everybody said, oh, what a great politician Kevin McCarthy is. Look how he cobbled together the votes when everybody thought he couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Scalise looked at the sidelines. He's the number 2. Thinks Steny Hoyer every time Nancy Pelosi wins another speakership.
Okay.
And Scalise says, what is with this guy? I know how stupid he is. I can't believe he's beating me, because I wanted to run for Speaker and decided not to, but oh my gosh.
Yes.
Fine. So all of the gossip rags, Politico and Punch Bowl and Mark Halpern, who's back, who has a newsletter, are all writing about how wonderful a politician dumb old Kevin McCarthy is, and he's dumb like a fox, and this, that, and everything else. And the rest of us are stepping back and saying, what this episode of winning the speakership showed us is that he's really weak. Not that he's really strong. No, he's really strong, say the gossip sheets, because we get all our information from the Speaker's office. And he did this and he did that, and you just wait. He's going to pass stuff.
Okay.
So the next thing that comes down the line is the debt ceiling crisis that they created. And they created in order to hold a hostage. And they held a hostage because what the ultra-radicals were really thinking is, it's not that we told the Speaker that we want some say, like a lot of say, like complete say over what goes on with the agenda. But what we mean by that is we intend to hold the good faith and credit of the United States hostage, as well as a bunch of other hostages, until we get what we want, because we know we don't have the votes. But that's not the point. We don't care about whether or not we want the votes. We don't believe in democracy. This is a republic. We represent people, and if we can get it done, that's what matters.
Yeah.
So the debt ceiling thing came up, and McCarthy cobbled together a bill. Now, the way his office says it is that, and everybody thought he couldn't do it, and look what he did. And the rest of us were thinking at the time, well, of course he could do it, because he promises everything to everybody. That's a mark of a weak speaker. No, it's because he wins. And so the thing passed, and then he had these negotiations with Biden, and Biden took him to the cleaners in the fine print, which even the New York Times acknowledges. And Biden decided not to negotiate in public, so it looked like he wasn't messaging, but he got what he wanted out of it. And, of course, everybody in the gossip columns and the gossip sheets were saying, oh, no, McCarthy wins because the Speaker said so, because McCarthy wins. Mm-hmm. And we looked at it and said, does this sound familiar? This looks like a really weak Speaker, because they had to make all these promises to people. And, in fact, in the process of getting that thing passed, he had issues in the Rules Committee, which we discovered and then discussed ad nauseum here about Rules Committee. And then it went to the floor, and he had trouble on the floor, and it passed. And the people who had helped him over the line for getting the speakership were really upset. Chip Roy, Ralph Norman, and other people along those lines. Ralph, I think is his name. Norman?
Yeah, Ralph.
One of the guys on two of those are on the Rules Committee, and they voted no. Then a bunch more voted no on the House floor. And then the reports were, okay, they're pissed at him, and they're saying in public that he lied to them. But that's okay because Kevin won, and because Kevin is a great politician, so none of it matters because they're not going to vote to vacate the chair because they have nobody to replace him. So his job is safe, and he's fine, and Kevin won. And the rest of us looked at this and said, that doesn't look like that to us. It looks like he's really weak and he's in trouble. And so the next thing that happened is a normal, ordinary messaging bill tries to get to the floor, and then the rebels won't let it get to the floor because they block it. Because he can only afford to lose 5 votes, and 11 of them said, we're not voting for this save the gas stove bill. We're going to embarrass the speaker, and we won't even let the rule pass that allows you to vote on the bill. So we'll stop it there.
Yes.
And, again, for those like totally unfamiliar with rules followed by a vote, it's sort of, like in the Senate, you have to have a procedural vote before you can have the actual vote, and sometimes the test vote is cloture, not the actual bill. Same sort of thing here. One precedes the other. And the speaker lost on that and was embarrassed, but it didn't stop there. All day yesterday, people like Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz were saying, we run the floor. We own the floor. The speaker can't do anything. We run everything. We're really ticked at him. And this is because all those promises that he made to us in private are now public, and we don't like him. And sure, we don't have enough to vacate the floor, but we have enough to stop anything he wants to do. And as of yesterday, people in the Republican faction that is ultra radical was saying, and we're not going to allow anything to pass. And McCarthy looked at this and said, fine, we're not having any votes. Everybody can go home. House is off this week.
Oh.
That's where I turn to you and say, I don't know what the heck is going on there, but clearly Kevin McCarthy has lost control of the agenda. If he had to close the House down, it wouldn't allow any votes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think he had any votes to do. I don't know. They have to decide. I mean, one way of looking at it, and I guess this isn't my intention.
Anyway,
to spin
that's my
it.
summary. Tell me if the summary was wrong before.
No,
you
I
tell
don't.
us what happens
I
next.
don't think so. But yeah, I don't think I had heard that he. I just missed the part where he said, forget it, everybody go home." But that's the natural conclusion to it, I think. The way he would spin it, I guess, and I'm not saying it's wrong at this point. Let me give you the headlines real quick. This is what am I here for?
NBC
I'm going to
News.
go home myself.
Conservatives bring the House to a halt
home.
as anger at McCarthy's debt deal remains. A small group of right-wing rebels block legislation for a second day, forcing leadership to cancel votes for the rest of the week. And then the header in the Washington Post, same story. House heads home after hard-right Republicans defy McCarthy. The House adjourned until Monday after a standoff between leaders and conservative lawmakers. Yeah. So that's the background. So, yeah, he did send him home.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, to me, I'm like, if I'm standing in McCarthy's shoes, essentially here, and the rebels start saying, well, we're not going to let anything through, I mean, well, okay, the truth is that if the rank and file of the body don't want something to go forward, they can stop it. The speaker can't force it through. They still need to have the votes to do things, and that's fine. Although I guess I would have said, and McCarthy's not supposed to be in this role, but he does say to himself, remember, I don't care about this gas stove thing. I mean, I don't. Or maybe he does because he's a weirdo too. But, this is your idea. You guys wanted to save gas stoves. They're not in danger. There's no legislation we need to stop. There's no regulation we need to reverse. You just want to declare your love for gas stoves.
You want a gas stove czar. You want a general.
Yeah. So
in the war against blocking gas stoves.
Right. So I said, remember, I'm beholden to people. All speakers are beholden to the membership in a certain sense. Usually it's a little more stable than this, but it's essentially the agreement this was just a little more overt than usual, but the agreement is always, well, you do pretty much what we want and help us pass our agenda, and we'll help you be speaker and stay speaker, and things will work out. So everybody says they've gone back on their promises, and so McCarthy says, yeah, you want to see somebody go back on their promise? You wanted a gas stove bill. I brought the gas stove bill to the floor. Then you said, I don't want the gas stove bill. So I said, all right, we won't have the gas stove bill. We'll go to another bill. No, we don't want that either. Well, you said this is your bill. No, we don't want it. Well, okay, you know what? We'll go home. Well, that just proves that you don't have control. Okay, I don't have control, but there's a long list of bills here that you said you wanted. I want a gas stove bill. I want this. I want that.
Bills. I'm ready to a microphone, and I'm talking to reporters, and I'm telling them that the conservatives, that they call themselves, which are really the ultra-radicals, are all pissed off at McCarthy, and it all goes back to the speakership when he made promises he didn't keep, and McCarthy's a liar.
Yeah. Now, meanwhile, the rest of the country is like, oh, no, you just found out that politicians are liars? Wow. I thought you were like super savvy and inside because you are a politician. Right. I mean, hello. Yes, you make deals. Sometimes the deals fall apart. And by the way, you also have a long tradition, you radicals, of totally misunderstanding things that you think you've been promised. It says we the people right here at the top of the document. And therefore, that means I can say whatever I want. Whatever I want, and the police can't.
Because people like Ringwis and Matt Glassman and others who are expert on Senate rules and other things about Congress were bringing up all of these precedents about where it says in the record that you're not allowed to call the speaker a liar, that you're not allowed to call the speaker a crybaby. I guess some of this stuff goes back to the Newt Gingrich era. You're not allowed to call the speaker names, and they list the names you're not allowed to call the speaker, which is actually pretty funny.
Yeah, well, it tells you,
What about
who
Coward?
was speaker
Coward
back in
Is
the
that
old
one of
days?
the 7 things that George Carlin says you can't say on the congressional
it wasn't George
floor?
Carlin. But yeah, there are real rules about it, of course. That's true. But I mean, essentially, the situation at the moment is, we're going to hold our breath and possibly shoot ourselves in the foot until you do what we want. And McCarthy says,
why don't you do it underwater with chains?
Yeah. All right. And so we'll go home for a week. And also sending everybody home for a week, or however long it turns out to be. It's also, they get around it, but it's a good way of saying, instead of having the various groups that would be plotting a coup against me, sitting around a table eating pizza together with nothing to do but brood about it, I'll send them home to their districts. They'll take the invitation, they'll fly home, and then they'll, at best they can Zoom with each other.
You can send me home. You can't make me go home. What if we order pizza anyway?
Yeah, well, you can do that, but these guys are.
Isn't there a place called We the Pizza, and you can just go ahead?
There is. Yeah, you could do that, and I mean that's happened before too, where the leadership has tried to close the floor down, and in protest, some group has stayed on the floor and attempted to, get video of themselves saying they're holding for these guys. I don't know if they did that. I think they just went home.
So this is where the gossip sheets really get fun. This is Punch Bowl this morning. So all of this is happening, and the Washington Post is describing it, and NBC News is describing it, and other outlets are describing it. And so their sources, remember, are basically from the speaker's office. So they go to their sources and say, what's going on here? And you know what their sources say? Well, it's true that there's a little bit of a revolt here, but you know what? It's Steve Scalise's fault.
Oh, all right.
That's what the whole piece is about. Brings us to the episode this week, Punch Bowl News says. McCarthy's allies blame Scalise for the drama. They claim Scalise's handling or mishandling of a gun rights resolution by Andrew Clyde sparked the conservative uprising.
Ah, yeah.
Here's the story. For the last few months, Scalise and the leadership have been working on getting the votes for Clyde's proposal barring ATF's ability to regulate pistol braces.
Yes.
This was a tough vote for the leadership, as some GOP moderates had no interest in it. That problem was exacerbated during the debt limit debate when Clyde and other conservatives voted against the rule for the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That's the debt ceiling thingy.
Right.
Democratic votes were needed to pass the procedural motion. Some moderate Republicans vowed to vote against any bill offered by conservatives who tried to take down the rule.
Yeah, there you go.
McCarthy allies, and that's what we've been waiting for them to do. McCarthy allies say that Scalise fumbled the episode, which fueled the furor. McCarthy himself blamed Scalise Wednesday. Conservatives claim Clyde was threatened by somebody in leadership. We talked about that on the show yesterday.
Yes,
Scalise, for his part, told Clyde that he wanted the bill on the floor next week and declared it would come up. And the interesting thing is that when McCarthy was negotiating the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the debt limit thingy,
yes,
he relied on Garrett Graves of Louisiana and Patrick Mahenry of North Carolina. That is to say, Garrett Graves from Louisiana, not Scalise from Louisiana, who's the senior guy in the delegation, and the number 2 in the House, and Patrick Mahenry, who used to work for Steve Scalise.
Oh, is that right?
Was his deputy whip.
Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. Yes, in that sense.
So they're both
team.
McCarthy people, and Scalise feels alienated, and so the number 2 feels like he's like vice president. Nobody respects him, and that's why I brought up what Steny Hoyer must have felt like all those years under Nancy Pelosi. So I turn to you, my congressional House expert, and say, what does the number 2 actually do?
Oh, well, he's actually supposed to be responsible for the floor schedule and making decisions, traffic decisions about what's going to come up when. He's the
technically he's the
traffic
majority
director.
leader, right?
Yes, the majority leader has that role, and that would be the number 2 ranking member of the majority party.
But, nobody ever sees him do anything, and McCarthy blames Scalise, and since nobody ever sees him do anything, he's like an easy target.
Yeah.
So he's really pissed, and he's blaming McCarthy, and we're all sitting back having popcorn and saying, this is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for the Republican House to implode because the factions don't get along. Mm-hmm. And, Scalise is like, OG Tea Party. He goes back, but now he's not MAGA enough.
Yeah.
And so
the other, part of the discussion
and then you have the Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene split, and Greene is siding with leadership, and true MAGAs don't really like that, and there's a whole lot of infighting going on here that's breaking out into the open, and it's really hard to picture how they're going to go into the next election with any kind of unified front. And those who are divided, houses that are divided, and all of that sort of thing. This is a house, and it's divided.
Yes, that's true. And as I discussed a little bit yesterday, this is a pattern you see all the time with political parties and political movements. You think Howard Dean people coming in and taking over, and then being attacked viciously by Bernie Sanders people. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We just did the whole show during the break, basically. But to recap, yes, we've all been through this before, Democrats and Republicans alike, and it's just one of those coalition party things that happens. I didn't mean to say that, Bernie Sanders people are terrible or anything. It's the way of things, right? There was the Howard Dean style revolution of sorts, and it sweeps away kind of the old guard as the Howard Dean.
The Orange Revolution, which swept away the DC-centric party.
Yes, or whatever, right? So, and then, Howard Dean people run for office all over the place or for party leadership roles. And then along comes the next thing, which just happened to be the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. And, they have a vested interest in saying all that has come before must be swept away. It's just that this time it was a movement that was being swept away than usual, the Howard Dean movement. And it wasn't really swept away anyway, and a lot of overlap, etc. But same thing in the Republican side. Get rid of the old guard Republicans, says Newt Gingrich. So they all do. And then comes the Tea Party, and the Tea Party says the Gingrich people aren't radical enough for us and sweep them away. And then MAGA comes and says the Tea Party isn't radical enough for us and sweep them away. And now fast forward just a little bit, Marjorie Trader Greene is no longer radical enough for us to sweep her away. It happens a lot. And then the inter-party dynamics of taking revenge on people like Andrew Clyde, who's got this gun bill that he wants to bring to the floor. Some people are interested in it, some people aren't. I'm not really sure why there are Republicans who dislike that bill, given the content of it as I understand it. But more to the point, Andrew Clyde wants a big trophy bill brought to the floor, and that's a big favor that he's asking from the leadership. A backbencher from nowhere wants a signature bill brought to the floor to cover himself in glory, and the rest of the people are saying, either leadership or less radical Republicans, saying, well, last week we all had a job to do, which was to save the economy from collapse by dealing with the debt ceiling, and it stinks, and people in my district have been radicalized against it, but I realize it needs to be done, so I took the tough vote and said yes to the rule and brought the thing to the floor and fixed the problem, at least temporarily. Whereas you radical weirdos decided to take the easy way out and do the popular fun thing that didn't actually help anybody. And now you want a favor from us. And the answer is no, we needed a favor from you last week and you were nowhere to be found. Big deal. Andrew Clyde came up with a bill that bans a ban on pistol braces. Well, if I like that bill, then I'll write it. I'll write the same damn thing and I'll put my name on it and I'll ask the leadership if I can bring that one to the floor, and they'll say, you know what? When we needed you, you were there for us. You get your name on the pistol brace bill and Andrew Clyde can go F himself. That's the way things work in the House. You got it. If you don't help,
and they made it public, and they're really upset about it.
Yeah,
it's like the first time they've ever done this.
Yeah, it's how things work on a daily basis. It's petty and weird in the sense that you should say, well, shouldn't the substance of the bill control? Well, the substance is the same whether Smith brings it or Clyde brings it.
Have any of you people ever gone to high school?
Yeah, really. What's wrong with you?
Because that's how this place works. Don't you get it?
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. And I mean, sometimes we say it's petty and weird, but at the same time, it's pretty upfront and understandable. This is sort of the way I felt about Las Vegas after visiting it for the first time and realizing it's petty and weird and dirty that everything moves by money. But once you understand it and just say, if I just put a $5 bill here, I'll get what I want. All right. I mean, I understand that transaction.
Right. So,
and I have $5.
It's just of a piece. And then you step back, and with Chris Licht getting thrown out of CNN, that doesn't change the fact that the owners still want what they want. And when you're looking at how the House is divided amongst itself and think, well, that's not really going to help them get reelected and keep a Republican House in 2024, you step back and realize that the reporters who spend all their time on politics in Washington have their bias, and their bias is Republicans basically win, and that's where they start from. And so they step back and say, well, look, everybody knows the Republicans are going to keep the House, even though it's only a 5-seat majority, despite what happened in 2022, because prices are too high, housing costs are too high,
the rent is
and
too high.
The economy was better under Trump, which means prices were lower. And yes, there's reasons, and the public doesn't care about that, and that's just the way it is. Ignoring Dobbs-Roe, ignoring the results of special elections, ignoring what happened in 2022 and 2020, ignoring the fact that Biden's in a relatively strong position to get reelected, which is no guarantee, but, he's got a record, and the record isn't that bad. And so, it may be that the Republicans don't win the House. And so then they'll go back and do all these explainers about how it happened while not recognizing what's right in front of their nose. The House is divided, and a House divided cannot stand. And I can't stand a House divided.
Honestly, I can't stand this House
I think this
divided
House
or not.
group is revolting.
That's right.
I mean, all of these things are true.
Yes, they are, including all the bias that they hold, and some of the biases that they hold are particularly untrue. But
yes, but a lot of their information comes from the Speaker's office, and the Speaker's office is Republican at this particular point in time.
Yes. That part is true.
Oh, we won't be influenced. We know, but it influences you totally because that's how you write about it.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I think there was some more about that bias, although I think it was a little bit more related to the Chris Licht thing. But this is the day where I get to say I have an article from Perry Bacon about that. Although maybe Perry you already have it in your list.
No, I don't have that.
Oh. But yes, he has an opinion piece.
Otherwise, I'm going to turn to things prosecutorial.
Okay, well, you know what? We should do that. I'll give you the headline, and I can just sort of read it later, unless you really want to hear it now. But CNN's Chris Licht showed the problem with anti-woke centrism.
Oh, I do want to hear that.
Oh, okay.
I love this stuff.
Let's see if we can get through it.
Almost as much as I love House procedure.
All right. Then we can, we'll do it. We can pause along the way if you like. In a roughly 15,000 word profile last week from The Atlantic, you read that one to us, CNN chief executive Chris Licht, who has complained that the network's journalists were too opinionated when Donald Trump was president, gave a lot of, well, opinions. And I don't think we discussed as much of his opinion that was expressed in that article as the rest of the good stuff. But
well, yeah, basically you can't be neutral about January 6th, and he was trying to be. And that sucks, and you're wrong.
All right. Well, he expressed skepticism about defunding the police. That's okay. That's one thing. And about using trans-inclusive language when referring to people who give birth to children. He implied people of color with Harvard degrees don't add diversity to newsrooms, and suggested that the news media should have more reporters who are religious, who own guns, and who lived on food stamps as kids. That's a weird mix. I mean, the food stamps thing might be helpful. He speculated that COVID-19 deaths might...
Does he want more people who are interested in gaming and massacring schools? I mean, how far does this go?
I don't know. The food stamps strikes me as, well, okay. I'm not sure where that came from, but you want me to concede something to you, yes, let's do the food stamps one. He speculated that COVID-19 deaths might have been overcounted by public officials. Overcounted. Well, that's sort of the opposite of what actually happened. Right. He said journalists should not virtue signal and that it's hard to have difficult conversations without being demonized or labeled. Yeah, well,
that's because if you're an insurrectionist, you deserve to be demonized and labeled. It's that simple.
Okay. After the firestorm created by the Atlantic article, Licht is now stepping down from his post. And I guess I would wonder.
I need to spend more time with my kids that I don't have.
But all of
have them, they don't talk to me anyway.
All the harsh criticism is a bit unfair to Licht. How do you like that? In particular, his skepticism of left-wing causes and his view that people who don't agree with the left are constantly attacked and shamed isn't some outlier stance. Wait a second. What? Okay.
That doesn't make it true. Those are two separate statements.
These
ideas
may
not be an outlier stance, but that doesn't make it true.
These ideas are regularly expressed in many of the nation's most prominent news outlets. If you spend a lot of time talking to white men in democratic politics, as I do, you have to nod along as comments like Licht's are made, even if you don't agree with them, to signal that you are a reasonable person worth talking to. Okay. Licht's comments embody...
Perry Bacon is not a white man.
That is true. Right.
You need to add that for context there.
Right. You hear me saying it, and you might be aware that I am a white man. Perry Bacon, no. Licht's comments embody an anti-woke centrism that is increasingly prominent in American media and politics today. That's true. We discussed that, particularly among powerful white men who live on the coasts and don't identify as Republicans or conservatives. It's deeply flawed, and it's pushing some important U.S. institutions to make bad decisions. By anti-woke, what I mean is skepticism of progressive causes and ideas, especially on issues of gender, race, and sexuality. The term woke is vague and imprecise. That's certainly true. But I think it does capture the movements toward greater equality, such as Black Lives Matter, that have gained strength and prominence over the past decade, particularly since the protests after the killing of George Floyd. What I'm describing is softer than the outright opposition on the political right to ideas such as critical race theory. Licht, for example, did not say he wants to see racial diversity initiatives at workplaces overturned or to ban gender-affirming care. You might call this centrism, and to some extent it is, but this is not the centrism of, say, President Biden, who opposes some left-wing causes but doesn't spend a lot of time deriding people who support them. Anti-woke centrism is really about emphasizing differences with progressives who are inaccurately cast as Twitter-obsessed college graduates who constantly use terms like Latinx and are out of touch with ordinary Democratic voters. Also, this kind of centrism isn't usually described with that term by the people who practice it. Instead, they cast themselves as non-ideological and neutral while arguing.
Right.
Yeah.
They're totally nonpartisan.
Oh, yeah.
What's the definition of nonpartisan here? Nonpartisan is I'm against anything that would threaten my job and my status.
Okay. Well, that's easy to understand anyway. And look, I think one example comes up next here. Instead, they cast themselves as non-ideological.
You're threatening my job and my status.
Right. Like Licht. Licht repeatedly referred to those who don't share his journalism vision as looking to do, quote, advocacy. Likewise, Chuck Todd, in his announcement this past Sunday that he's stepping down, cast those who didn't like how he hosted the show as partisans. New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger and former Washington Post executive editor Martin Barron have recently written pieces suggesting critics of the mainstream media don't properly understand and appreciate objectivity and journalistic independence. You see where this is going. All right.
Yeah, it's a bunch of crap.
Well, what they think, yes, certainly. But yeah, I think he's right in taking them to task and saying, pointing up again.
And he's very good at it too, and that's why people like Jay Rosen really need to be paid attention to. There is a church of the whatever
savvy,
he used to call it. This church of savvy. Yes, exactly. We're savvy people who really understand things, and you little people out there who don't are in no position to criticize us because we're totally objective.
It's interesting that you raised
The View from
Jay
Nowhere.
Rosen. I don't know if you know this, but it was Jay Rosen's Mastodon account that retweeted this thing, such that it came into my timeline. So
very cool.
He thinks the same thing.
Yeah.
So you're in good company, and you understand him very well. I don't know. We could keep going with it, but I think the point is setting up nicely. But Rosen had a lot of praise for the style with which Bacon makes this point. So
yeah, and Perry Bacon is very good and has been for a long time.
I can continue.
And
with
he's not overly impressed with himself.
No,
nor is he overly impressed with the newsroom. And, the whole idea that diversity is bad is bad.
Yes. I mean, there's a very apt comparison to be made here, and I've seen others make it, to the ideas that Martin Luther King expressed about having to deal with white moderates, essentially, who just
but it's
be
not just that. It's
here.
also that if you step back and look at the picture of relatively affluent, middle to upper class white males being the face of journalism, you get the Glenn Thrushes and Mark Halperins and others who have been suspended for sexual aggressiveness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yes, you need diversity. That's why.
Yeah. Like,
if
we
your
need some
boss
people who
is
think
a woman,
that's a bad
and
idea.
half of the newsroom are women and half the reporters are women.
Yes.
A little bit less likely to happen. Doesn't mean it won't.
You would hope so. Yeah.
But if it does happen, a little bit more likely it'll get exposed.
I think that's true. I mean, another way of having some diversity would be to say, well, we can have men here who think that's a bad idea. That would be helpful and diverse.
Yeah, well, the consensus is it's not a bad. Well, then change the consensus.
Right.
That's why you need diversity.
I think I'll continue with the reading of this during the second half because I do want to spend some time on that other orange thing that's bothering everybody.
Well, the other orange thing that's bothering everybody, again, I said either on Monday or Wednesday, can't remember, that all of Washington was abuzz with the idea that Trump was going to get indicted.
Yes.
And now there's stuff out that he's going to get indicted soon. You read, I think, from The Independent.
Yeah.
And the Brits seem to report rumors a little faster than the careful fact checkers here in Washington who will be held to account if they don't get it right. The Guardian and the Independent were reporting that, look, indictments may come as soon as today because the grand juries are meeting. And again, we talked a little bit about the dichotomy between a Florida grand jury and a Washington grand jury.
Right.
It may be different people are being indicted. It may be Trump being indicted for different things in different places, like Paul Manafort was. I'll leave that for the experts. I'm not an expert on that, but it does feel like imminent means like the horizon is within the week or so.
Yes.
And that's way closer than it's been for a long time.
It may be a bit much to say today, but the papers were saying as soon as today. Well, sure. Usually that means no. Like your package could arrive as soon as today. Do you think you're getting your package today?
But the difference is it's not Sunday, so we know they're delivering.
Right. Oh, now they're delivering on Sundays these days.
Well, it depends who you are, right? Post office doesn't, if that's how you're getting it. But Amazon does.
I think
UPS usually doesn't unless you pay extra.
Yeah. True, and we're all paying extra, really, honestly.
Yeah, the point is, though, the grand jury is meeting.
Yeah.
And if the grand jury is meeting, that means indictments may flow out of it.
It could, or they could say, well, we want to present a little more evidence, and then we'll do this next week. We don't know, but okay.
People familiar with the matter said prosecutors want to base much of the case in Florida for where most of the alleged misconduct happened. And one thing I haven't seen stressed that other people have stressed is the timing.
Mm-hmm.
If Trump stole documents as president, that's Washington.
Yes, right.
If Trump obstructed things after he was president and was the former guy,
right,
that's Florida.
Yes.
So that might be part of it too.
Yes, it's true. That could do it, although I wonder whether you could establish the jurisdiction because, yes, you are obstructing down in Florida, but what were you obstructing? You were obstructing a subpoena issued to you from D.C.
Well, but then it was, espionage because you were giving away stuff you shouldn't have when you were at Bedminster.
Yeah,
that's probably Washington. He could be charged with espionage in Washington and obstruction in Florida.
That's true. A number of people could be charged in Florida, and it's good they cover all their bases. There won't be
right. Plus, as we said yesterday, the Florida grand jury can interview all the Mar-a-Lago employees and not make them, fly all the way up to D.C. just for that, which they probably can't afford.
Right. That's true, and lots of good reasons to have it a grand jury convened in Florida. Although they're full of Florida men.
They called me in front of a grand jury. I think I should have a lawyer. Well, I live in Florida. I don't know anybody in D.C. Well, and they're also very expensive in D.C., so you better fly up here, get yourself an expensive lawyer.
It's full of
I'm
smoke.
A groundskeeper. I don't have that kind of money.
Yes.
Well, it's not our problem.
Right. True.
That kind of thing.
Or there's unhealthy air up there. I don't want to go.
Well, so
I live in Florida for the healthful
The special
climate.
counsel shifts focus of possible indictment to South Florida. Says the Washington Post. Prosecutors tell Trump's legal team he's a target of investigations, says the New York Times. The notice from the office of the special counsel suggesting an indictment was on the horizon. It's coming any day now, as Fannie Willis likes to say. August being not that far away.
Oh, that's any day.
Yeah.
It's a day.
And then Politico, if you want something that's not behind a paywall.
Oh.
Trump notified that he's the target of ongoing criminal investigation. Now,
you should know that.
What seems clear to me is the guy's going to be indicted. I don't know when. I don't know for what. I don't know where. That's different than a trial. Federal trials happen faster than state trials. So, Joyce Vance and others who know this stuff say that it may be that if he's federally indicted, trial could actually take place before the election. All of that's relevant because that's driving a lot of what's happening on the candidate side. Chris Christie is in. Mike Pence yesterday is in, making a lot of news. Pence was really an interesting character here in the sense that he made this big speech about how I did my constitutional duty when the chips were down, and anybody who didn't, or anybody who asked somebody else to not do it, is not qualified to be president.
Yeah.
Who is he referring to?
Oh, he must be. What's the governor of North Dakota who's running again?
Nobody knows.
That guy.
Even the governor of North Dakota doesn't know his name. So let's say he was referring to Donald Trump. But then the reporters actually pressed him. They asked non-Chuck Todd follow-up questions. And they said, but wait a minute, you also said that you will support whoever the nominee is for the Republican Party.
That's right.
Does that mean you'll support Donald Trump? And Pence gave the usual mealy-mouthed answer, well, I'm going to be the nominee, so that question is moot. And the reporter said, but what if he is? And Pence said, well, look, I think the important thing is to understand that we have a whole lot of good people running. Yes, but what if he is? Well, but what if he is? Because what you just said means you won't.
So the reporter started yelling, hang Mike Pence.
Right.
You know?
It was interesting. Joe Scarborough was trying to handle this and said, basically, it's really simple. These guys are lying, and you just have to understand this. If they're asked whether or not they'll support the nominee, they'll lie and say yes, because otherwise they won't be the nominee. But once they're the nominee, just like Trump, who might say the same thing to get on the stage, will simply not support them if they don't feel like it.
All right.
And in Trump's case, almost guaranteed he won't support them. So basically, they're all lying to you. And see, that's where you get this, anti-woke, middle-of-the-road centrist reporter crap. You need the New York Times and Washington Post. In the headline, Trump lies about what he'll do if he's nominated. I mean, that's basically what's going on here, and you need people telling you that.
I guess. Although, it's funny. I mean, Trump was, I guess, in that sense, the only one that actually told the truth, at least in 2016. They asked that question.
Yeah, he said, I'm not sure. I don't know if I will.
Yeah. They asked him on stage, right? Everybody raise your hand if you'll support whoever's the nominee. And he was like, and to his, well, I mean, I hate to credit him with anything, but I guess you have to say, because it's a figure of speech, to his credit, as the entire stage raises their hand and he says, the hell with it. I'm really not gonna.
I don't think so. And by the way, I also think John McCain's a loser. None of the rest of you do. Fine. I mean, that was then, this is now. And the thing is that it's pervasive within the Republican Party because you see it in another person, not just Pence who's a hypocrite, but Chris Christie's a hypocrite.
Sure, of course.
Chris Christie's in the race. That's great. He's got a big mouth. I hope he really takes to Trump. Look what he said about how corrupt his kids were in Saudi Arabia and how Trump is absolutely, positively unqualified to be president. And we know that now. He said, we didn't know it in 2016 when I was running against him.
Oh, my God.
And supported him, but we know it now because then he didn't have a track record and now he does. Fine. Follow-up question. So given what you know now, would you vote for Trump or Hillary? Somebody actually asked him that.
Yeah.
And he said, well, of course I'd vote for Trump.
Right. Well, there's a problem.
Well, duh. Look, are you lying or are you stupid? Which is it?
Both. The standard answer, can it be both? But I mean,
no. Standard answers. No, you can't vote for if you feel that he's really unqualified to be president for the reasons that you said, that Mike Pence said, that Asa Hutchinson said. None of you should be voting for him, and you all should admit that it was a mistake to support him. Hutchinson has just about gone that far. The others haven't. They just have pretended they have.
And Chris Christie particularly egregious for a number of reasons, not the least of which was that he actually, not only supported Trump, but worked for Trump.
Well, so did Pence.
Even more so. But also the idea that this is just now coming to light for all of us to understand. Remember that Chris Christie grew up in the same area I did, and I knew Donald Trump.
Casino.
Yeah,
you have to close it down.
We sometimes bring up the point that the New York area people have known the nature of Donald Trump since forever, and that the rest of the country may have been introduced to him as the apprentice guy or something else, perhaps.
But I knew him before then because he was a real estate shark.
Yeah, and everybody knew it in the D.C. area or the
New
York area.
A crook, a shyster, a grifter.
Yeah.
Even the lowest of the low, real estate people thought he was the lowest of the low.
And Chris Christie is from the next town over from me. There's no world in which he didn't know who Donald Trump was well before he ran for
basically, when the
president.
crooks think you're dishonest, that's bad.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he doesn't deserve anything either, and he
So
should
Mike
shut
Pence
up and get
knows
off
this,
the
and as
beach.
you say, Chris Christie knows this, and when push comes to shove, when you ask them, okay, but would you vote for him versus, let's say, Joe Biden? If they don't say no, I get why they're doing it. They have to lie because they want the nomination.
Yes.
But they're lying. And so the newspaper's job, the reporter's job, the journalist's job is to outline the fact that they're lying because they so clearly are. Now, you could do that by the embarrassing follow-up questions that Mike Pence couldn't answer about Trump. That's one way to do it. Another way is just to flat out say they're lying.
Yeah. And it reminds me a little bit of the story we began with about how shocked Republican members of the House are that Kevin McCarthy was lying. But this one they don't support. I don't support him. I'll not support him. Even if he's the nominee for speaker, I'll change my mind. I don't know. It's just a weird thing. The weird, effect of power.
We can't say that politicians lie. I mean, how are we going to do our job? Who are we going to cover?
Yeah.
Well, we'd have to say that about everybody. Yeah, well, go ahead. Yeah. That's what the rest of the country's been waiting for.
That's true.
Morons.
Yeah, wait a minute. What is that?
What the hell is supposed to do, you moron?
Exactly right. That's where that was quoting
right.
Axios.
And we also have another piece that can help them, right? The
Liar!
Exactly. That's the public, and the other one, you play the liar first because that's the public complaining about how the media does it, and then you play the other because that's the media's response.
Right. Easy. And then someone, I don't know what, fixes the whole thing and finally calls him a liar, and then says that. And then we got all the movie clips from here. But all right, actually, 2 of them are Animal House, aren't they? Well, we need more diversity in our movie clips.
Right.
All right. Well, there's an awful lot. We covered a lot of ground. That's good.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
There's a lot less time left to cover any more ground. Anything else that we need to sneak in that has been waiting in the wings, or if not,
Pat Robertson's still dead.
Okay.
Thank you, God.
There you go. That was Pat Robertson saying that. So it's not me. He's happy he's dead. I'm not really sure why that works, but that's evangelical belief for you. Yeah, that was also a big story. And now the social media, not just Twitter, but Mastodon, is now full of debates over whether or not it's okay to say, I'm not unhappy that he's dead. But I will say this.
It's too soon.
Yeah.
Wait till 11 o'clock.
That's a good film of us saying, it's all right, at 11. That's... It's interesting news, and I will say he's certainly been surpassed, and has been for quite a while. He was kind of elderly, so he wasn't in his prime. And in his prime, he was a pretty upsetting figure, to say the least. But other evangelical preachers have left him in the dust. All right. Well, thank you, Greg. And thank you, Greg. I should say. We need a clip that says that. And it's weekend time, so we'll check in with you again Monday. All the things can go wrong between now and then, and you'll be there to recap them after they do. See you then. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That's it. We're done. We covered all the things. Not really. Of course, there's plenty more to go and to get to. As a matter of fact, I guess what we could do is we could finish the Perry Bacon article. That was a little difficult. Usually, Greg is excerpting these articles, and I didn't really have a chance to read this thing ahead of time and pick out the best parts. But I was assured that it was, well constructed and well written and made this excellent point. And I don't know if I've gotten around to finishing that excellent point. So I think a good way to start would be to continue with that Perry Bacon article. So those of you just joining us, tough, I guess. You won't get the setup. But this is Perry Bacon in the Washington Post under the headline, CNN's Chris Licht showed the problem with anti-woke centrism, which is a narrow slice of, I think, the political spectrum, but practiced for some reason by some of the most influential people not actually in politics, but those covering politics. And that colors the way the rest of us see politics, and it's unhealthy and bad, like the air outside. But we left off, I think, here. This is probably a good place to pick it up again, just recapping a little bit about what we read in the first half. It really matters that these anti-woke centrists often live in deeply democratic areas. If you are in a red state, like me, Perry Bacon, you are constantly in fear of your state government adopting conservative policies, such as new limitations on reproductive freedom, transgender rights, and honest education about race. Yes, you absolutely do need to fear that these days. But if you live in D.C., New York City or San Francisco, a much more realistic concern is that a, quote, woke liberal with whom you don't agree gains political power or sharply criticizes you in public. Americans are losing hold of a fundamental right as citizens of a free country to speak their minds and voice their opinions in public without fear of being shamed or shunned, the New York Times declared in the first sentence of a March 2022 editorial. In reality, there has never been a right to voice your opinion without the possibility of being shamed or shunned, terms without precise meanings, of course, and there shouldn't be. Shaming and shunning people are free expression too. What I suspect this editorial was actually calling for is for self-described Democrats and liberals to be able to express more conservative views, such as skepticism about transgender rights, but without being attacked in the way that conservatives often are for such views, by being called bigots. People who are not white men sometimes express Licht's sentiments. See Democratic Mayor Eric Adams of New York City, for instance. But it's hard to ignore that the people most invested in these sentiments tend to be white and male. The left-wing movements of the past decade, particularly Black Lives Matter, say America is dominated by white supremacy, patriarchy, and out-of-control capitalism. So it is not surprising that rich white men view these movements, particularly their more radical ideas, with some skepticism. Licht and Elon Musk, who has expressed similar sentiments, control two hugely important media platforms. Their views matter. That they have become consumed by this anti-wokeism has meant that great journalists were fired at CNN for being too anti-Trump, and that Twitter's verification system was disabled, it seemed, because Musk felt it gave too much prominence to left-wing people. It's discouraging that Sulzberger is caught up in Twitter bashing, recently casting the platform as fostering a type of groupthink inside the profession. Is Sulzberger carefully reading tweets from local news organizations in small and mid-sized cities across the country and concluding that the coverage is groupthink? I doubt it. He's just rebuking left-leaning activists who used the site to critique the Times. There was plenty of groupthink inside elite news outlets such as the Times before Twitter existed, but not really an easy way to alert their reporters to police shootings of unarmed black men. There can and should be open debate about police reform, diversity, COVID-19 policies, and other issues, both between the two parties and among progressives and other non-Republicans. But when we have a left that is pushing America to finish the work of the 1960s and create a true multicultural democracy, and a right that is banning black intellectual ideas from public schools, it's a huge mistake for powerful non-Republicans in society to spend so much time bashing the left. This anti-woke centrism often sounds as though people are auditioning to be today's version of, hey, there it is, the white moderates that Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. castigated 6 decades ago. I knew this had to make an appearance in this piece somewhere. But Licht and others like him should definitely stop being so anti-woke. It is disappointing that some of the most powerful people in the country think the problem in America is that people are too critical of the police and insufficiently critical of transgender activists. I can't tell if the anti-woke don't understand what's actually happening in America, or if they actively oppose a more equitable country. They'll certainly tell you that the latter is not the case, but it sure seems like it is if you just look at what they're doing. All right. I'm glad we got to the end of that piece, and that we absolutely, I'm glad to see that there is, of course, a mention, there had to be, I think, of the white moderates called out by Dr. King. So not surprising there. Let's see. Other things to catch up on. There were definitely a couple of comments that came in under the KITM hashtag via Mastodon yesterday that, some of which I'll have to scroll back and find so that I can share with you, but not all of them were hashtagged, I don't think. Let me see if I can scroll back, because Ricky had said something about the wildfires yesterday when I first mentioned them, that now I'm having difficulty locating because yesterday was a busy day for me on Mastodon somehow, although I don't feel like I spent a great deal of time on it. But there we are. The Eastern Canada fires that have started in the last week let's see. It's Canadian provinces. Do I know all of these? Nova Scotia, NS. New Brunswick is NB. Oh, PQ. Are we talking about PQ? I don't really even know. Offhand, I'm terrible with the Canadian provinces. I mean, I guess that's Quebec. Well, what's the P? The province of Quebec? Is that what we're saying? I don't know why that's PQ. Yeah, Province du Quebec. Okay, gotcha. I mean, Q doesn't, I guess that's just too short. They used a 2-letter thing, so PQ. Got it. Okay, just making sure I knew what the hell we were talking about. But yeah, so sorry about that, Canada. The Eastern Canada fires that have started in the last week in those 3 provinces is a perfect storm of fuel provided by downed trees caused by Hurricane Fiona. Wow, okay. Extremely dry conditions, not usually associated with a hurricane, of course, but they happen at different times. Trees downed by a hurricane, then extremely dry conditions, especially for April and May, and this is a common denominator with their American cousins, idiots playing with fire. Though that does happen from time to time. They may even have been American idiots that we sent up to Canada to do something like that. Sorry about that. And they didn't realize why, what do you mean PQ? It's just Q. I'm lighting this place on fire. That's it. I can't take it anymore. All right. Let's see. Other comments in reverse chronological order here. Mighty OCD had something to, let me check in on this. If the House did the motion to vacate or whatever, it is to get rid of McCarthy and they're successful. How does it work? Do they vote for a new speaker immediately? What if they can't agree on one? Does it revert back to the same procedure as regularly electing a speaker? Does he stay speaker until they do? Well, if they make a motion to vacate the chair and it prevails, chair's vacant. So he definitely doesn't stay speaker. Whether or not the rules would insist that they immediately then proceed to another vote for speaker, or whether they could somehow conduct business with a different leader in the chair temporarily, whether that be the clerk of the House or anybody else, I'm not certain. But it feels like the sort of thing that there might be an insistence that the House's business can't go forward until there's a new speaker. Even though I imagine they could probably, on an emergency basis, if they were right in the middle of something that absolutely had to be finished, they might be able to they might be able to garner a 2/3 vote to waive the rules and proceed with someone else, a speaker pro tempore in the chair instead. But yeah, they would probably then have to go immediately back to a vote. They'd have to basically recreate the January conditions where it took them 15 tries to get McCarthy in there. And what if they can't agree on one? They sit in limbo like they did in January, voting over and over again until they figure out what to do. Or they garner 2/3 vote to waive the rules and come up with something else. Or adopt a new rule. I suppose that's possible as well. But there is the constitutional mandate. It's not really thought of as a mandate. It's thought of as a prerogative of the House to choose their own speaker. But maybe it's a mandate as well. The House, the members shall choose the speaker. Well, you got to do it. You shall do it. Maybe you can't do anything else. No one's done this, at least not for a while that I know of. So I don't know where the precedent lies for that, but it seems like the sort of thing that, yes, would throw them into chaos, and they'd have to stop all business and try and settle the question of who will be speaker, which, though, normally that's a terrible prospect and can't be countenanced. But right now they're in that limbo as it is. No bills can go forward because they're stopping everything. They might as well vacate the chair and get themselves a new speaker. All right, so that's my guess there. Also, more news from Matthew Rigdon, who is back on the Tucker Carlson beat, saying that, I guess did he do his first Twitter shows now, or what? What's going on here? Looks like nerdy Alex Jones, Matthew says, is doing the whole thing backwards. He's starting his new career by being sued. And he brings an article from Mediaite. And what's going on here? Fox News accuses Tucker Carlson of breaching contract with Twitter show. That's good. I love to see everybody like that involved in litigation. Aidan McLaughlin reports this story. Let's figure out what's going on. Fox News accused its former host Tucker Carlson of breaching his contract with a new show on Twitter. The network claimed in a letter that Carlson's new show, the first episode of which dropped on Tuesday, is a violation of his contract, setting up a potential legal battle between the cable news giant and one of the biggest voices in conservative media. The letter, which was first reported by Axios and confirmed by Mediaite, noted that Carlson's contract stated that his services shall be completely exclusive to Fox, and that he is prohibited from rendering services of any type whatsoever, either online or on another digital platform. Fox ousted Carlson, who hosted the highly rated 8 p.m. hour of the network, in April, just days after the network reached a bombshell $787.5 million settlement with Dominion Voting Systems over the airing of 2020 election lies. Everybody, please, how much did they originally ask for in the suit? $1.6 billion. Anyway, Fox did not provide a reason for why it abruptly dumped its most popular star, but sources said Fox Corporation chair Rupert Murdoch ultimately decided Carlson had become, for a few reasons, too much of a liability for the network. So they're not solving any of that mystery for us, Matthew. Even before the network settled with Dominion, Carlson's behavior had emerged as a problem for Fox News, Mediaite reported at the time. Carlson hired high-powered attorney Brian Friedman to negotiate his exit from Fox. He is currently hamstrung by a non-compete in his contract, which runs until January of 2025. Fox reportedly offered him $25 million to serve out the rest of his contract in silence, an offer he rejected. His lawyers have since declared war on Fox, if that matters, accusing the network of fraud and breach of contract in an attempt to escape the terms of his agreement. On Tuesday, Carlson dropped the first episode of his new show on Elon Musk's social media platform called Tucker on Twitter. The show took the format of a 10-minute monologue delivered from a home studio with Carlson controlling the teleprompter. His monologue was not unlike the screeds he used to deliver nightly on his Fox News show. At one point, he described Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish, as a persecutor of Christians, as well as shifty and dead-eyed, and sweaty and rat-like. That's terrific service to America. Anyway, in a statement to Axios, Friedman responded to Fox's legal threat. Fox defends its very existence on freedom of speech grounds. Now they want to take Tucker Carlson's right to speak freely away from him because he took to social media to share his thoughts on current events. No, because he signed a contract saying that he wouldn't do that. It has nothing to do with freedom of speech, but and the lawyer knows that, but he didn't actually say First Amendment, so you can't pin that one on me. Plus, I'm not in court, and you can't sanction me for it. So that's what's happening there. Thank you for providing a link to that, Matt, and we appreciate your persistence on the Tucker Carlson beat. He's a funny subject. All right, let's see, other things to share with you. There are many. What's this one? I have lots of things. Many of which I do not know what they are. Oh, yeah, that is interesting. How can I connect that one? I don't know. I'll have to get around to that. We got a segue to that one. Also, Scott had sent me this one just for context from the Air Force Times, reminding you that espionage is actually a serious crime. Doesn't mean that they're going to do a serious thing necessarily to Donald Trump about it, but by way of comparison, we have a very fresh story of the retired Air Force officer who just got 3 years in prison for having classified documents. It's actually reported by the Associated Press, carried here in the Air Force Times. A former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer was sentenced Thursday to 3 years in federal prison for keeping classified documents at his home and other unauthorized locations. Now, this makes me think that this is, a slightly older article. It's not ancient. It's from last Friday, but right there when it says sentenced Thursday. By the time I got this, there had been no time to sentence anybody yet, so it must have meant last Thursday. Who was it? Robert Burcham. Birchum, 55, in case you're wondering. How old is this guy, by the way? Was sentenced in Tampa federal court, according to court records. He pleaded guilty in February to unlawfully possessing and retaining classified documents relating to the national defense of the United States. That's how you violate the act. Burcham was also fined $25,000. According to the plea agreement, Burcham, who retired in 2018 as a lieutenant colonel, served in various positions in intelligence over his 29-year career and worked with classified intelligence information for the Joint Special Operations Command, the Special Operations Command, it's a different one apparently, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. In 2017, law enforcement officers discovered that Burcham knowingly removed more than 300 classified files or documents, including more than 30 items marked top secret, from authorized locations. Prosecutors said Burcham kept these classified materials in his home, his overseas officers' quarters, and a storage pod in his driveway. Not great. Prosecutors specifically noted that Burcham possessed 2 documents on a thumb drive found in his home that contained information relating to the National Security Agency's capabilities and methods of collection and targets vulnerabilities. Their unauthorized release could have caused exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States, officials said. There was no indication from investigators that Burcham ever distributed the classified material. So important point there too. You don't actually have to be caught giving it to anybody. You just have to unlawfully possess it. So yes, Trump will be guilty of violating the Espionage Act. And this guy got 3 years for doing it. And, we'll see what happens with Donald Trump. But good context, but only insofar as it will give you reason to be frustrated with nothing happening to Donald Trump if that ends up being the case. All right. So, yes, that brings us over to the article from The Independent that I mentioned early on, first thing, I think, in the program. Andrew Feinberg is the writer of the piece. This is how they get to treat it in the UK papers. Prosecutors ready to ask for Trump indictment on obstruction and Espionage Act charges. I like that it's in the headline. But it is still at this point just speculation. That is pretty good speculation. And you shouldn't worry too much about whether or not that's going to happen today, though. That's not necessarily the case. But they point out the Department of Justice is preparing to ask a Washington, D.C. grand jury, this is the D.C. one, to indict former President Donald Trump for violating the Espionage Act and for obstruction of justice as soon as Thursday, adding further weight to the legal baggage facing Mr. Trump as he campaigns for his party's nomination in next year's presidential election. By the way, they electrocuted the Rosenbergs for violating the Espionage Act, but whatever. The Independent has learned that prosecutors are ready to ask grand jurors to approve an indictment against Trump for violating a portion of the U.S. criminal code known as Section 793, which, of course, you know already, prohibits gathering, transmitting, or losing any information respecting the national defense, which they spell wrong because it's The Independent. The use of Section 793, which does not make reference to classified information, is understood to be a strategic decision by prosecutors that has been made to short-circuit Trump's ability to claim that he used his authority as president to declassify documents that he removed from the White House and kept at his Palm Beach, Florida property long after his term expired on January 20th, 2021. That section of U.S. criminal law is written in a way that could encompass Trump's conduct even if he was authorized to possess the information as president, because it states that anyone who lawfully having possession of, access to, control over, or being entrusted with any document relating to the national defense, and willfully communicates, delivers, transmits, or causes to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted, or attempts to communicate, deliver, transmit, or cause to be communicated, delivered, or transmitted, the same to any person not entitled to receive it, which would be him when he's not president, or anybody else for that matter, or who willfully retains the same and fails to deliver it on demand to the officer or employee of the United States entitled to receive it, which he did, can be punished by as many as 10 years in prison. It is understood that prosecutors intended to ask grand jurors to vote on the indictment on Thursday, but that vote could be delayed as much as a week. That's not a whole long time, but as much as a week until the next meeting of the grand jury to allow for a complete presentation of evidence or to allow investigators to gather more evidence for presentation if necessary. A separate grand jury that is meeting in Florida has also been hearing evidence in the documents investigation. That grand jury was impaneled in part to overcome legal issues posed by the fact that some of the crimes allegedly committed by Trump took place in that jurisdiction, not in Washington. Under federal law, prosecutors must bring charges against federal defendants in the jurisdiction where the crimes took place. Another source familiar with the matter has said Trump was recently informed that he is a target of the Justice Department probe, which began in early 2022 after National Archives and Record Administration's officials discovered more than 100 documents bearing classification markings in a set of 15 boxes of Trump administration records retrieved from Mar-a-Lago, the century-old mansion turned private beach club and sex dungeon, where Mr. Trump maintains his primary residence and sex dungeon and post-presidential office. Over the course of the last year, grand jurors have heard testimony from numerous associates of the ex-president, including nearly every employee of Mar-a-Lago, former administration officials who worked in Trump's post-presidential office and for his political operation, and former high-ranking administration officials such as his final White House chief of staff, Mark Meadows. Meadows has already given evidence before the grand jury and is said to be cooperating with the investigation into his former boss. It is understood that the former North Carolina congressman will plead guilty to several federal charges as part of a deal for which he has already received limited immunity in exchange for his testimony. Uh-oh, that's bad for Trump. Prosecutors are also prepared to ask grand jurors to indict Trump on charges that he obstructed justice during the year-long investigation and caused false statements to be made to investigators by persons working for him. It is possible that such charges could stem from a declaration submitted to federal investigators roughly a year ago when FBI agents and prosecutors visited his home to retrieve a sealed folder filled with 38 classified documents which Trump's attorneys turned over in response to a grand jury subpoena. According to court documents, the government subsequently developed evidence indicating that documents had been removed from a storage room where his attorneys had stated that all such documents were being stored in the days following the receipt of that subpoena. Using that evidence, which reportedly includes surveillance footage taken by cameras placed in the interior of Mar-a-Lago, prosecutors obtained a search warrant for the property that was carried out by FBI agents on August 8th of last year. During that search, special agents discovered 103 documents bearing classification markings, including 18 marked top secret, 54 marked secret, and 31 marked confidential, including a number of documents that were stored in Trump's personal office. And of course now, not mentioned in the article, but now we know that there's tape of him intimating that he kept similarly classified material in his residence at Bedminster as well. And then later had his attorneys say, nope, we searched Bedminster and there's none here. And just as he was lying about what was going on and what he was hiding in Mar-a-Lago, he's probably lying about what's being hidden in Bedminster as well. So there you go. That's where we stand with that. Other things to share with you. Man, there is an awful lot. Let me go back to what's going on in the House and read you the report from Emily Brooks and Michael Schnell at The Hill over where we are in the House rebellion. Conservative rebels throw House into limbo. Let's see how they put it here. A revolt from conservatives thrust the House floor into a state of limbo Wednesday, with leaders forced to delay a second try at advancing a rule that GOP rebels shot down one day earlier. The office of House Majority Leader Steve Scalise scheduled a vote for Wednesday at 12:20 p.m. on a rule to advance 4 bills related to gas stoves and regulatory reform. I mean, they don't bother spending any time. They should, but they don't bother spending any time in this article explaining, oh, yes, by the way, these 4 bills are stupid. But when that time rolled around, leadership was forced to recess the chamber as the talks to break the impasse continued. The path forward is unclear. When the House went into recess, the office of the Majority Whip, Tom Emmer of Minnesota, advised members that multiple vote series are possible in the chamber on Wednesday. But now we know that I guess nothing happened and they all went home. Shortly before noon, Speaker Kevin McCarthy told reporters it is the House GOP's intention to hold votes Wednesday. We're talking through it. I think we'll get through it, he said when asked about the standoff, later adding, I'm not worried about the rule. But Scalise, when asked whether there could be another vote on the rule on Wednesday, said just after 1 p.m. that he is not ready to make that decision yet. And I guess the decision's been made. Nothing happened, and they all left. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. This is about the time, usually on a Friday, when we turn to the weirder or more esoteric stories. And I have plenty, but I kind of feel like maybe we have to stick to the politics, at least for a little while, just to sort of set things up for next week and figure out what might come next in the House. I was in the middle of reading from The Hill about the decision to try to pass the rule for the gas stoves bill a second time and then suspending that effort yesterday. What ended up happening here? Let's see. Conservatives are still incensed, of course, at the debt limit compromise deal McCarthy struck with Biden. They got more votes from Democrats than Republicans, though 2/3 of the GOP conference voted for the bill. A group of 20, quote, concerned conservatives met among themselves on Wednesday morning to discuss their issues with leadership. Ralph Norman was there, and he told The Hill about it. But the major hurdle to reaching some agreement appears to be a big one. Conservatives haven't named any demands and are still deciding what they should be, which, as you know, when liberals do it, is cause to dismiss them as a political force. Well, they're occupying Wall Street, but what are their demands? And then they made them, and they said, but what are really their demands? But if Republicans have no demands, it's cool and awesome. I don't know, Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona said when asked what he is looking for in order to break the impasse and move legislation on the floor again. The speaker formed a coalition with Democrats to get us a $4 trillion national debt, and I continue to be concerned because he hasn't repudiated that coalition, and my guess is he's prepared to do that again on the next 3 must-pass bills: Farm Bill, NDAA, defense, and the budget. We're looking for concrete things that are going to be done, Norman said. When asked to elaborate, he responded, well, that's in process now. He said the group knows, quote, a couple of things they are requesting, but could not detail them because they have not been agreed to by the group. Biggs would not say whether he plans to vote against every rule until there's a satisfactory conclusion, or if Tuesday's rule takedown by a group of 11 conservatives, including Biggs and Norman, was a one-off. Now we know it's something larger. Tuesday's floor drama appears to have been a spur-of-the-moment decision. Biggs said it was rather organic, and Norman said it was spontaneous, a spontaneous group who voted against the rule on the floor, which would explain why they have no aim yet. I guess that's fair enough. It marked an embarrassing rebuke to McCarthy and a stunning scene on the House floor when Scalise and Emmer huddled with more than a dozen conservatives in the back of the chamber in a tense effort to get them to flip their positions. In the end, Scalise joined the conservatives in opposing the rule, a procedural move that allows him to bring the measure to the floor again in the future. The final vote was 206 to 220. It's the first time since 2002 that a rule vote failed on the floor. Part of the conservative fury from, conservative fury from conservatives. And what other kind of fury do they have, really? Stemmed from Representative Andrew Clyde, alleging that the GOP leadership threatened to keep his bill from coming to the floor if he voted against the rule for the debt limit bill last week. Scalise said Tuesday morning before the failed rule vote that he had discussed with Clyde that his bill to repeal a federal rule banning pistol braces did not yet have the support to pass in the House. McCarthy addressed the dispute to reporters on Wednesday, appearing to subtly put the blame on Scalise. The majority leader runs the floor, and yesterday was started on something else, McCarthy said. It was a conversation that the majority leader had with Clyde, and I think it was a miscalculation or misinterpretation of what one said to the other, and that's what started this, and then something else bellowed into it. I don't think he means bellowed, but okay. Because of the slim majority in the House, GOP leadership can only afford to lose a handful of members on partisan votes. Norman on Wednesday said there is a lack of confidence in McCarthy and the GOP leadership. And then he goes and says exactly that. So, I don't know. Now he's quoted saying that. And we told him that. We told him this yesterday. He pointed to the differences between the Biden-McCarthy debt limit agreement and the House bill that Republicans passed in April to raise the borrowing limit. There's a lack of confidence with having the bill ended up so different. We thought we had a bill that was pretty much the minimum, and what ended up pretty much everything was stripped out of it for the most part, and we talked about the appropriations bills. Most of us are for the gas stove bill and that we have on the floor, but it's just total frustration and lack of confidence. McCarthy put an optimistic spin on the impasse. Tension only makes you stronger. Conflict makes you stronger if you deal with it, McCarthy said. If I would shy away from this, I wouldn't want to do this job. I enjoy this work. I enjoy this job. I enjoy this conflict. I don't think the rule going down is such a bad thing. I don't think not winning on the first vote for speaker is a bad thing, McCarthy said, referring to his historic 15-ballot speaker election after facing opposition from many of the same people who sunk the rule. Do you all think that's terrible? Yes. Everything has to go perfect. I actually like to change things on its head. Change things on its head. You should change something on your head. I want to watch Washington be different than it was before because I don't think it was working. I want to watch it be different. Very passive. Okay. Interesting to note. And I want to add to that some more that I'm going to have to read to you from the emailed Hill's morning report. I don't even know how I really got on this email list, but I usually ignore it. But I thought this was actually a pretty good summation that brings us into the appropriations process later on. So this is the one from yesterday. Alexis Simendinger, maybe? I don't know. And Christina Karish. Oh, boy. Are the writers of the Hill's morning report, which runs like this. Debt ceiling fight sets stage for appropriations battles. We mentioned that was coming. Just a little more background on it. Congress's months-long debt ceiling battle may be over, but that doesn't mean the new spending limits are sitting well with lawmakers on either side of the aisle. The new law is already fueling divisions across party lines and among factions of the House GOP. Speaker Kevin McCarthy rejected pressure from some Senate Republicans who were upset about curbing defense funding through the bipartisan deal, dubbed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, reached with President Biden. It's likely that these grievances will continue to shape the discourse in Congress as both chambers work through the regular appropriations and budgeting process. Then a quote from McCarthy here. This is the beef I have. He says, we just came to an agreement, and the first thing I hear over there, I don't want to vote for it. We need to pass a supplemental, the speaker said, referring to a standalone bill to boost defense spending. McCarthy's comments come on the heels of criticism from some Senate Republicans who have balked at defense spending levels set as part of the bipartisan legislation, which suspended the debt ceiling until 2025, to prevent a federal default in exchange for setting new limits on government funding and other measures to repeal previously allocated money. While some Republicans lauded reforms in the law, writes The Hill's Aris Foley, GOP defense hawks have railed against the legislation for including a penalty of automatic across-the-board cuts if lawmakers don't finish their annual spending deals by the end of the calendar year. Lawmakers haven't met their annual funding deadline since 1997. So this is what we spoke about, that there's this automatic trigger of across-the-board cuts if lawmakers don't finish all of the 12 appropriations bills in time, and that hasn't happened for a long, long time. Of course, I haven't seen the language of the deal. One thing I would question is, well, when you say across the board, what's the board? Like, are there automatic across the board cuts if you finish, I don't know, just theoretically, 6 of the 12 appropriations bills? Like, in a government shutdown situation, you would be looking at that and saying that there would be a partial government shutdown if they don't pass the other 6 appropriations bills. It's not the whole government, just those parts that haven't finished their appropriations bills shut down. That's what usually happens. So if you've passed 6 of your 12 appropriations bills and then across the board cuts are triggered, are they across all 12 appropriations areas, the entirety of the federal government, or only imposed against those departments that have not yet been funded because their appropriations bills haven't passed? That's an open question for me. I don't know if it's answered in the agreement or not. But that's not even the concern that they're worried about. They just don't. There's defense hawks, Republican defense hawks, who say you shouldn't have a hard cap that freezes defense spending. That should increase. And in addition to that, there shouldn't be any threat that there would be an automatic cut to defense just because everybody else fails to pass their appropriations bill, or if we do. Defense hawks just don't think there should ever be a drop in defense spending. The measure passed the Senate late Thursday, the debt ceiling bill, but not until leaders from both sides of the Senate issued a joint statement. What passed on Thursday? This couldn't have been. Did they take that long to pass it? And I don't think so. Last Thursday, because today's Thursday. Okay, so yes, the measure passed the Senate late Thursday last week, but not until leaders from both sides of the Senate issued a joint statement into the congressional record clarifying the proposed caps would not block lawmakers from passing supplemental funding for defense in the event of an emergency. Another neat legislative trick. We're going to have spending caps for regular appropriations, but those caps don't apply to emergency appropriations. So let's just do an emergency appropriation. And it could be for a genuine emergency, or as a legislative trick, it could be, well, the spending caps say we can only spend arbitrarily $100 billion on defense. I don't really know what the number actually is, but whatever. And I don't know what the cap is either, but let's say that's the cap. And it seems like a stupid cap, but all right. Let's say that's what it is. And you spend up to that cap and you're like, I want another $10 billion. Probably be another $100 billion, but whatever. I want another $10 billion. No, there's a cap of $100 billion, and that's how much you spend. Well, this is an emergency. Says who? Says a majority of the House. We just decided that this is an emergency, and emergencies don't count towards caps. So boom, there's an extra $10 billion. The Senate knows this. And that's why they went along with the deal. We can always undo it for defense or anything else that we declare an emergency about. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell both said they were open to a future bill on the subject, placating those members who were upset with that aspect of the law, writes The Hill's Al Weaver, but it appears McCarthy was not consulted on the topic. Nationally, a new Reuters Ipsos poll showed neither Biden's Democrats or Republicans in Congress emerged as a clear winner in the battle to raise the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. The survey conducted after the bipartisan deal passed found that 50% of Americans thought neither party emerged as a winner, while another 20% said both sides won. How do you like that? Not sure what to make of that. Meanwhile, political and financial experts are fretting over the latest episode of fiscal brinksmanship that preceded the debt limit deal, arguing that the disruption threatened by default was simply not worth the moderate reduction in the deficit. As the Hill's Tobias Burns reports, credit agency Fitch warned last week there has been a steady deterioration in governance over the past 15 years, with increased political polarization and partisanship as witnessed by the contested 2020 election and repeated brinksmanship over the debt limit. Failure to tackle fiscal challenges from growing mandatory spending has led to rising fiscal deficits and debt burden. So it's actually deficit hawkery, peak hawkery, as Joan would say it, not any real concern with the lack of governance. Some experts say the doomsday contingency of the debt ceiling fight is more evidence of polarization within U.S. politics, citing the fact that cooperation and compromise between the parties can only happen when the stakes are almost preposterously high. What makes this extraordinary is that there is a space where the two parties can and should have sustained debate about spending priorities of the country, and that's in the appropriations process. William Howell, a politics professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, told The Hill, that process is about to come into stark review for many as conservatives who are frustrated by the debt limit compromise that McCarthy struck with the White House are turning their attention to the annual budget bills. Actual appropriations bills, not budget bills, but you get the idea. A first taste of post-debt limit deal frustration came Tuesday with the defeat of the rule and the gas stove bill thing. They do mention that. Actually, that wraps it up for their backgrounder. But yes, the appropriations fight to come is, I guess, the next big clash. And for them to decide on what is the interpretation of across-the-board cuts if all the appropriations bills aren't passed. And, of course, if the punishment/reward of not finishing the appropriations process is across-the-board cuts, then now a small group of Republican conservatives have discovered that they can defeat the rule for any appropriations bill that comes up. They have the ability among themselves to trigger these across-the-board cuts, which I think will probably just lead McCarthy and others to a place where they'll agree that the cuts should only apply to appropriations bills that aren't passed. So now we'll have to sit and wait and see whether they start blocking the appropriations bills right from the beginning or just block the last one in order to try to trigger things or what. We're not really sure. And then, of course, that would set up a really interesting situation because generally speaking, Democrats are going to vote against these appropriations bills. They usually would anyway, but they're going to be extra motivated to vote against them because they contain so many cuts to discretionary spending. If the only way to get the rule passed and the bill passed in order to avoid across-the-board spending cuts is to give some concessions to Democrats who want to put some money back in there, that's going to be real interesting. So, yeah, we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And now we can go to the esoteric topics of the day. There are a bunch. I have another article on the golf thing, but I feel like I might save that. It might not. We may have gotten to the point of that one, but basically an article saying that, the merger is not quite a merger. It's more like a hostile takeover, and sort of a long form version of making this shorter point that was made about the golf thing in the article we read yesterday, was it? Which was that the Saudis really wanted basically to be able to buy ownership stake in the PGA Tour, but that wasn't available to them. They couldn't do it for a number of reasons, not the least of which is apparently the PGA Tour as an entity is a non-profit entity, which seems astounding to me. But it is one, and it's organized that way for some not so terrible reasons, really. But suffice to say that it is a non-profit organization, and that is not something that a sovereign wealth fund from a foreign entity, or anybody for that matter, can buy an ownership stake in. And, you can only buy ownership stakes in things that are organized, I guess, as for-profit corporations. And And so it just wasn't available, but they didn't take no for an answer. And so instead what they did was they, went and organized their own league to try to threaten the domination, the exclusivity and control over golf that the PGA Tour had, and did so. And then in order to sort of survive and settle the problems between them and the loss of revenue, they agreed to a merger. The PGA did, but only a merger that would then put officers of the Saudish Sovereign Wealth Fund in a leadership position, co-chair of the PGA Tour. So they couldn't buy their way in a traditional sense because of its nonprofit status. So they engineered a different way to get what they wanted, and that's what happened. And then, of course, the great disappointments of players and the PGA Tour originally saying, yeah, we're not going to cooperate with this Saudi-owned LIV thing because moral issues. The Saudish are terrible on human rights and everything else under the sun, and we're not going to give in to this blood money thing. And then, of course, poof, oh, well, you know what? We will, actually. And that makes leadership of the PGA Tour look terrible, but it also leaves a lot of players out in the cold, people who were then encouraged by the PGA Tour to take a public stance in support of the PGA's defiance of this move by the Saudish Sovereign Wealth Fund. And so they went out there and said the sorts of things about Saudi Arabia that got Jamal Khashoggi murdered. And at least they thought they had the backing of the PGA Tour behind them. I don't know if that's protection or anything, but they had some moral backing there. And then the rug got pulled out from underneath them. And now those guys have to go compete for a living on the PGA Tour, which is now co-chaired by the Saudish. So I don't know whether they're going to start murdering their golfers or not. Probably not. It's bad for business. But does life return to normal? Can they go on and compete just as they used to and expect to be treated the same way now that they are on record criticizing essentially the co-owner of the PGA Tour? I don't know. And then, of course, other people were worried, well, what about the people who abandoned the PGA Tour to go to LIV Golf? Well, will they be welcomed back to the PGA now? I don't have too much worry about them because, of course, their guy is co-chair of the PGA Tour now, and, of course, they'll be welcomed back. The real concern is for people who never left the PGA Tour and were outspoken against the Saud power play. Will they be physically safe? And would they, one of the aims, by the way, of this other tour was to, the whitewashing of it, the sports washing of things, was they wanted to expand they wanted to expand golf tournament hosting, essentially, and bring golf to golf-starved areas of the world, including, of course, those in the Arabian Peninsula, but elsewhere. So now I guess the question is, if you're on the PGA Tour and you stood up for the PGA Tour and you stood against Saudi takeover plans for the PGA Tour and were outspoken about the Saudi human rights record, but now you find that the Sauds own half of the organization you work for, and then they say, in the interest of bringing golf to, golf-starved regions of the world, we're going to have a tournament here in Saudi Arabia. Do you go? Given that they snatched up Jamal Khashoggi, not even in Saudi Arabia, but inside the consulate, but they did it in Turkey. Like, would you set foot in Saudi Arabia for a golf tournament and think you were safe? I'm sure the first inclination is for them to say, I'm on television, it's as safe as can be. But I don't know, man. They chopped up Jamal Khashoggi. I can't tell you that it's safe to go play golf anywhere, for that matter. They may consider the clubhouse of every PGA tournament to be a Saudish consulate from now on. I don't know. Watch your back, I guess, is the best advice I have for you. Okay, well, this leaves us without as much time as I really wanted to do the esoterica. But, man, I don't know. Perhaps I can make a more compact argument here out of some of these things. Let's see what I've got for you to share. Gosh, I don't know. All right, well, there's... Let me do this one. I'm just going to choose the other one instead. An article that I had put away that has nothing to do with anything, I think. But I put away a couple of weeks ago, just in terms of bringing to your attention something weird that would be under the radar for most of us as political observers. But it came from ProPublica, which is often on our radar. This is a long, long read, but I'll give you the long story short of it. The headline of this piece from May, 18th, Daniel Golden and, Kunal, Purohit, I hope I've pronounced that name close to correctly, wrote this piece back on May 18th for ProPublica, an education article. The newest college admissions ploy. Always got to keep an eye on that stuff now. Paying to make your teen a, quote, peer-reviewed author. How do you like that? I guess now that everybody's been caught faking up participation in weird esoteric sports as a way into college, they're trying this one. So it's no longer enough for you to go and take care of orphans in the Sudan or something. Now you have to be a peer-reviewed author before you graduate high school. How do they do it? Again, long story short here, it is a matter of you pay enough, money. If you're a well-to-do family, you can do this. You enter your teens in a program to work over the summers, generally speaking, but I guess it could be year-round. You get paired up with a professor, and that professor or their teaching assistants or whoever are mentors to you in driving you towards putting together work for publication, which by itself is not a terrible thing so long as it's a worthy publication, etc. But then, of course, this also gives rise to scams like journals dedicated to the publication of nothing but the work of high school students, precocious ones at that, but maybe the standards aren't up to snuff or something, or maybe most people don't really know the difference between a peer-reviewed journal and a non-peer-reviewed journal, and sometimes they make it difficult to understand the difference, and sometimes there are two versions of a journal, one peer-reviewed and one not. But I guess I was going to say, long story short here is that this is another racket that sometimes produces such insightful and important research by high school students as, why is the Chick-fil-A sandwich so delicious and good, and will they gain success in America? And they conclude, to no one's surprise, that the sandwich is in fact delicious and they will succeed in America. And thank God we have that sort of research behind us. And now I'm a peer-reviewed or published author, and you need to admit me to Harvard. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but you can see where there's a lot of room for exploitation in that system. It's a very interesting article, and I highly recommend it. To give you a real flavor for the shadiness of it, you really kind of have to read the author's treatment of it. But that's something you might want to do over the weekend. But then I was reminded of this when I saw a different article. They quote a academic in here saying basically, in addition to it being sort of scammy and weird, it's problematic because it devalues research and makes it seem like research is something that you can do on a pay-to-play basis, which maybe it has always been the case, but it was slightly better disguised. But it diminishes the value of research, and it diminishes the value of research for students who are about to enter into their college educations, which is kind of a bad time to teach them that research is stupid or worthless or something they can cheat on. And maybe it's the sort of thing that results in stories like the other one I put aside that had to do with research, which I'll also have to long story short you for. And this one comes from where? El País, Spanish language publication, although in this case, the English version of El País from Spain. A researcher who publishes a study every 2 days reveals the darker side of science. All I can do is read you the headline and subheader here. Basically, Spain's most prolific scientific academic, meat expert, like M-E-A-T, he's an expert on meat, Jose Manuel Lorenzo, put his name on 176 papers last year, exposing an underworld of shady practices. Pretty wild. Manuel Ansede, if I have that name correct, is the reporter on this one. A 46-year-old professor, Jose Manuel Lorenzo, is the researcher who has published the most scientific studies in Spain. He put his name to 176 papers last year, according to one count, by John Ioannidis, I guess, an expert in biomedical statistics at Stanford University, which was requested by El País. Lorenzo published a study every other day, if you include weekends, an astonishing figure far above the second-ranked scientist, a prestigious ecologist who published 112 studies in 2022. Basically, a aggressive response to the publish or perish problem that all professors face, but also revealing the ability to, buy your way into some weird credentials. I'm sure he wasn't motivated by the fact that high school students are publishing as well, but it all seems part of a piece to me. I just thought I'd throw you those two things to read over the weekend.
To Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And if you're not satisfied with those choices of what to read or listen to over the weekend, there's always the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, it's not even Friday. What am I thinking? It just feels like Friday. Good, we have time to discuss this tomorrow after all. I'm just reminded now by looking at Justice's alert, hey, it's Thursday, and that means the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is next.